Hi and welcome to the third lesson of our population unit. Today we're going to be looking at China's population, why it's so large and how it's changed. The activities for the lesson are as usual. There's an activity which is to watch this video. There will be opportunities for you to pause it and answer some small questions. And at the end there are 3 review questions. I'd like you to make sure you have a look through those and then upload your answers to them onto Show My Homework at the end of the lesson. So, today we're looking at a place called China. Now, we've looked at China before in terms of the manufacturing secondary sector. So when we were looking at globalization before Christmas, we were looking at China as a country, and we were looking at essentially how it's become this global manufacturing superpower. Now, on this map here is essentially a really rough version of China's physical and human geography. Okay, so where I've done this little bit of purple shading, that's meant to signify mountains. The little yellow bit is the desert, and the blue bit is a river as well. If you remember, at the Africa topic as well, the fact that it has these deserts and mountains indicates that China also has more than one different biome as well. So the major cities in China are Shanghai and Beijing, are probably the 2 most famous ones. Guangdong is also a very large city in the south of China. The question I'm going to ask you, have a little pause of the video here, is: do you notice any patterns as to where the cities are located? Okay, so let's pause the video. Any patterns as to where the cities are located? Okay, hopefully you've had a little look at that. So the first thing I notice is that a lot of these cities are located next to major rivers. Okay, so your little blue line is showing a river. They're located next to major rivers. That's a very key point for water access. They're all located on flat land. So we can see the mountains here. We can assume this is therefore land that is quite flat. And the other thing you might have got as well is a lot of them are quite close to the coastline as well. So a lot of the cities in China are kind of quite close to the edges, quite close to the coastline. And traditionally, that would have been for trade, so the city could prosper in the long term. Now, we're looking at population in China. And I've put on a little map of the world, only this map is a little bit different. Rather than showing geographic land area, this shows the world in terms of population. Okay, so to pause the video, and there are 2 questions. Which 3 countries have the highest population? And which South American country has the largest population? Okay, so hopefully you've worked out the 3 largest countries on there. I would go for China, India, and the USA. You could also have had Indonesia, they do look very similar. And the largest South American country, or South America, is down here. And on the map there, you can clearly see that Brazil is by far and away the largest country. What's interesting about this map is it shows you how small a lot of Europe is. So Russia, which kind of dominates the map, population-wise, is very small. And if you compare it to China and India, those 2 countries really are absolutely huge in terms of population. And China's population hasn't always been super high. It's always been one of the highest in the world, but as we've gone over its history, if we want to map it, as I've done here, its population has changed quite dramatically. As of the year 2000, China's population was about 1.1 billion. It's about 1.3 billion now, but if we go back all the way to the year 0 AD, which is 2,000 years ago, its population is about 60 million people. which is still quite a large number considering that the UK's population right now is only about 70 million. So, again, I like to pause the video here, and there are three little questions I want you to jot down. The first one, in the year 500, what was China's overall population? In the year 2000, what was China's overall population? Then overall, how would you describe the trend of the graph? Increasing, decreasing, or fluctuating? Okay, so in terms of answers then, again, I think in the year 500, you'd be saying about 50 million people. In 2000, it's 1,132. And in terms of our trend on the graph, it's quite clear that it remains quite stable, fluctuating, which means going up and down, up until about the 1700s, and then we start to see this huge rise. In the space of about 300 years, or even 200 years, China's population goes from 430 million all the way up to 1.13 billion. So it's quite clear that we can call that something called a population explosion. And again, a little quick pause. Can you think of any reasons why this may have happened? So why or what might have changed in China that meant their population exploded and grew so rapidly in that short space of time? Okay, so we are going to look at three reasons for that population increase. And we're going to go into some detail with them. Obviously, when we're talking about a population of a country getting larger, there must have been things that had happened that made people want to increase the size of their family. And usually, populations increase when things are good or when things are going well. Population decrease only tends to occur when we have things like war, but also when the population itself gets too wealthy. For China, which is an MEE, all the conditions for population growth are absolutely perfect. So, the first reason it grew dates back to the 1950s, and China is and was a communist run country. And in the 1950s, China was run by a leader called Mao, and during his rule, he enticed millions of Chinese citizens to obey his faintest commands. So because he was such a powerful leader, whenever he asked China to do something, all millions of citizens obeyed him without even question. So if he said to them, I want you to start growing this crop, or if he said, I want you to start having this many children, they would do it without really questioning why. And he believed that a large population was needed to secure the country's borders and to aid the industrialization policy. And that's that policy of introducing factories, etc., which has worked in the modern day. And it whipped up a fever to have more children to satisfy their leader. And as a direct result of that, many parents did follow through by large families, giving birth to these large families that started to prop up across China. Eventually, this backfired, as we're going to look at in a later lesson, because eventually the population got far too large for them to sustain, and they had to try and rein it in a little bit. If you've heard of the one-child policy, that's where that comes in as well. So, communist ideology, 1950s, encouraged China to have a huge population, and in a way, you can understand why he was doing it, because it allowed them to one, have a good army to secure the country's borders, but also to help with that industrialization policy that led to the birth of modern China as we know it today. The second factor, and this is the same with any population increase, it was simply advances in healthcare. China underwent huge advances in modern healthcare, and as healthcare improves, things like life expectancy increase. And if you're living longer, the number of people that die each year is going down. In the same way that as healthcare improved, infant mortality started to drop as well. And if you remember, infant mortality is the number of babies that die before their first birthday per 1,000. So if that's starting to reduce, that means more children are surviving and the population is increasing. If you look at our little graph here, this shows the infant mortality rates over the last 60 years. Now, this black line here shows China. These are the HICs along the bottom here, so it's really quite low. And this is China here. If we date back to the 1950s, China is way off the HICs. Their infant mortality is far higher. However, you can literally pinpoint the moment that better healthcare starts to kick in, because here it starts to reduce dramatically until now. It's still slightly higher than a HIC, but their infant mortality rate is very low. As a result of that, their population was able to grow and increase. And the last one is economic advancement. So China has become a manufacturing superpower directly due to globalization. We have studied that in our last unit, so we should have remembered that as a characteristic of China. And this has increased the average GDP per person, which basically means that the average Chinese person is wealthier than they were in the past. And there are two reasons this causes population increase. The first reason is that it all leads back to more money being invested in education and healthcare. So the more money people have in China, the more taxes are raised, etc., which enables China as a country to grow economically. But also, there's a theory that the wealthier you are, the more likely you are to have children. Because if you're in China and you're earning £500 a year, you might not be able to have a family of 3 or 4. Because if you did that, you wouldn't be able to afford to help them eat or help them develop. Whereas, as they started to get wealthier and they started to be able to afford luxuries and afford things like bigger housing and cars and better food, they started to have more children. And as a result of that, their population exploded or started growing quite dramatically. Okay, so we've got 3 review questions for you today. Again, as always, you can feel free to go back through this PowerPoint the absolute best you can and answer these questions. So the first one, explain how physical factors influence the location of Chinese cities. That is the map right the way at the start. Second one, describe what's happened to the population of China between the years 500 and 2000. Again, that is the graph we saw on the second or third slide of this video. And the last one, explain the 3 reasons why China's population has increased so rapidly. For that one, it simply asks you to explain those 3 factors we've just talked about. Upload them to share my homework, and any questions, please ask as normal.